Okay, during the hailstorm of 1994, it was late afternoon on a Saturday. I looked out south of the house. There's a creek, comes from in the wooded area, goes by the house, quite a ways from the house. But there was a cloud coming down that ditch. It reminded me of the scene in the Ten Commandments where the fog comes in before one of the plagues, the one that killed the firstborn, and you could just see it coming. It came down there, and then there would be birds standing up on the road, stunned. They didn't know what was going on. The leaves of the trees were pretty much gone. It was really a mess. We had very extensive damage. I know the next day, Donnie ran into the insurance agent down at Ampride in Jackson, the Quick Stop at Action. He announced he was going on a 2-week vacation, which I don't blame him. I'm sure he had a lot of people clamoring after him because of all the damage. But they came out and looked at some of ours and just shook their heads. There was nothing left at all. So that was the end of that. But the next year things were better. October of 1959, the Friday night, a football game. That's the last time I saw Dick. Halen was playing Central, and Halen walked all over them, our school. He was there. I saw him then, and that's the last time I saw him. The next day, I had to work the next day, and when I got home fairly early, he was out that night with Sharon Nelson and Sharon Lonzer and Gary Nelson. They later on got married. The three of them were in the car. Sharon lived at Allen. They were taking her home. Came around Highway 20. It was like 1:20 in the morning because his watch was stopped at that time. And he was T-boned by a drunk driver coming along Highway 110, which is just a little ways from where we're sitting right now. And his bones were broken, many of them. I think it was blood loss that was actually the cause of death. I don't know for sure. Sharon got a broken leg. Gary had cuts on his forehead. They both wound up in the hospital. Couldn't go to the funeral, but they later on got married. And they had, they have 3 children, I think. 4, I guess it was, yeah. Sharon has since died of a heart attack. They named the first child Rick. So I think that was in honor of Dick. But he was driving, so he bore the brunt of the blow. And we got a phone call very early in the morning from Aunt Gertrude that Dick had died. And so Dad went over there and did the chores. And went to church, and they were at church that morning, Meg and Marvin. And the funeral was planned for Wednesday. On Monday night, there was a wake at Becker's funeral home in South Sioux. And then the people from town who knew him and the people who went to school with him could come to that. Then the next day, they moved the body out to their house that they had lived in since 1945. And they had a second wake there on Tuesday night. At the time, they were doing extensive work on the road. The road was graded and soft dirt, but it wasn't any problem. Many people came to the wake that night, and then, as was custom in those days, most of them went home, some of them stayed. Shirley and I stayed in the room with him that night, and there were a few other people out in the kitchen drinking coffee, I guess, or whatever they were doing. Then finally most of them went home too. And then in the morning the hearse came again, and they had a prayers few prayers in the room where he was, and the casket was closed, and we went down to St. John's Church, which is no longer there, but the funeral was there, a Requiem Mass, and then afterwards the procession went on to Highway 20. Merle Anderson went up Highway 20 and stopped the traffic that was coming over the hill so that it wouldn't interfere with the procession. And we went down to St. Michael's Cemetery, which again isn't very far from here, and the burial took place there. Then that night it started raining, and it poured. And I don't know what they'd have done if it had rained the previous night, because the road was soft and dirt, no gravel on it. They had just graded it. But as it was, it worked out all right, but it started pouring rain that night. And that winter came very early. It was a very severe winter, 59-60. Yeah, Louise and Shirley and I and Peggy and Dick, we were together much of the time. You know, we spent Sundays together in most cases, all holidays together. 4th of July we never missed. And of course we'd go over there and go fishing a lot of times in the summer. The dogs would watch. We'd go in the pickup, in Fred's old pickup, and the dogs would watch. If we turned to the right, they knew we were headed to the river. We turned to the left, they knew we were headed to town. They wouldn't follow, but turn right and they'd follow because they knew we were going to the river and fishing. They had like 3 or 4 dogs, you know. Those days, all farmers had several dogs. Absolutely, they did. They went to school there. The store was there. Post office was there. Railroad station was there. Blacksmith shop was there. If they wanted to go to Sioux City, they went over to Goodwin and got on the train. And then they could come back that night. Because the roads, Highway 20 did not exist at that time. It was just a dirt road. It's the road that goes by the cemetery back, north of Jackson. So it would have been a project to drive horses into Sioux City. You could do it, but train was nothing to it. You just get on the train and next thing you knew, you're in downtown Sioux City. Oh yes, definitely they did. And it was customary for the local men to go over to Goodwin every night and sit in the general store and get the mail. Mail was in the post office was in the general store. It's a 4th class post office. The mail came on the train at night, so the papers and whatever other mail they got would be there, and they'd be over there and get it. And I remember Margaret Mitchell telling me that Matt McKivigan told her he hadn't missed a night in 35 years going to the store in Goodwin. I think he probably exaggerated a little bit, but maybe not. He lived just a little ways from Goodwin, west of Goodwin. So it was, and I know when that post office store closed, that must have been difficult for those people because they were used to going there every day. And of course they'd buy what they needed and chew the fat and settle the world's problems. But yes, definitely they frequented Goodwin. Life was a lot easier for them because of Goodwin. You know, if they'd had to rely on Jackson, it would have been, that's 7 miles away. That would have been quite a trip in horse and buggy, but you could walk to Goodwin easily. The school in Goodwin was there from 1905. Originally, it was in what's now a cornfield down across from Duggan's house. When Dad and Uncle Fred first went to school, they would walk over to Goodwin. The teacher lived in the house where, not in the house, but on the farm where Webbs live now. It was a different house then. They'd wait for her, and then they'd all walk down the track to the school. It wasn't very far when she got over there. And then in 1905, an election was held, and it was voted to move the school to Goodwin. So the local people loaded it up on, and I don't really know how they did it, but horses and wagons, and moved the whole building from there up to Goodwin, set it on a foundation, and it stayed there the rest of its useful life. My parents both went there. Aunts and uncles went there. Gertrude went there. She was 2 years going to Goodwin, because where she lived, it was quite a ways from the school, and it was a lot easier for her to get to it in Goodwin, which was an easy distance. So she stayed at our house and went to school. Now they probably wouldn't allow it, but in those days nobody cared. There is a picture showing the students in 1938 and the teacher. Teacher was Mary Gormley, who later on became Mrs. Leonard O'Neill. And then all the students are identified. Gertrude identified them. I didn't know them all. And I think she's about the only one living of the group. There was quite a few. So she went there, I think, 2 years. Started there, the first 2 years were in Goodwin, and I think she liked it there. But the custom in those days was you named the school according to the farm that it was closest to. But in Goodwin, it was different because it was in a town, so they called it the Goodwin School, obviously. The one-room school, not very big, had 6 windows. Well, and then there were 2 more we had a cloak room that was just an oversized closet, but it had the 2 windows in it, and a partition between that and the rest of the school. That's where we kept our coats, and that's where the water cooler was. And there was an old bookcase out there, and that was about all there was room for. When I started to school, there was still heating with coal. So there was a shed behind the school. We'd bring in coal from there and cobs, and it was very hard to heat. I know on Monday mornings, a lot of times in the winter, we'd all huddle around the stove for the first 2 or 3 hours. Then finally they put in an oil burner, and my dad, being on the school board, would have to go over there on Sunday night and start the oil burner so that by Monday morning it would be warm. It was just wood on the inside, no plaster or anything. Later on they put sheetrock on it. For lights, we just had two fixtures that were coming out of the ceiling that didn't do much good on a dark, cloudy day. We only had 1 door. I think later on they added a second door because of the fire marshal's requirements. But it continued to run for a long time. A lot of people came out of it. A lot of people had memories. At Christmas, we'd have a program. We'd put on plays and recite poems and things like that. I know I had to recite the night before Christmas one year. And then in the spring, when the school was out, the Sunday after the last day of school, there'd be a picnic, and all the people from the school district would come. Be a potluck, bring the food. Everybody looked forward to that because they all brought their favorites. And I remember one year the school kids played ball against some of the older men. My dad played, and John Duggan played, and I think they won. I didn't play. I wasn't old enough. It was this older kids. But anyway, I think the older men won, but the next couple of days they weren't much good for anything. You could barely move after, because they weren't used to that type of thing. They were in their 40s by then, and some of them late 40s, so they weren't used to playing baseball. But it was, by today's standards, it was totally inadequate. But when we got out of there and got into high school, none of us had any problems. We were academically on the same level as the students from the town schools. So we had a relatively good education because of the teachers, which is the most important part of it. But we had no audio-visual aids, they'd call it now. The teacher used what's called a hectagraph. And you probably don't know what a hectagraph is, but it was a tray like a cookie sheet with gelatin in it. And you could make a copy of something, put it face down on that gelatin, and then take it off. Then you could run off copies. You could just put down plain paper and it would give you a copy of what was on there. Then when you got done, you took the gelatin out and heated it up, liquefied it, and then started it over after it solidified. It could be used over and over. And we would trace things sometimes. We'd put the original up to the window and make a tracing of it. But as far as any kind of machinery or anything, there's no telephone, no radios, no projectors or anything of the kind. But we survived and thrived, and a lot of people came out of there who were very successful. There were 3 MDs. There was one man was a rocket scientist, literally. He was in California, and he's retired by now, but he did work on the space program. 1 priest, 1 Christian brother. And a lot of the girls who went out of there later on became teachers and were very successful at it. Then in about 1970, they built a new school, consolidated with Curran. They had consolidated earlier, but they built a new school. That lasted for a few years. That was down by Highway 12. But then it got absorbed into the Ponca School District. And now the students from there go to school in Ponca, although there are very few young people, school-age people, in what used to be called District 6, which was the Goodwin School. We're mostly older people now. Some are mostly even retired, don't even work anymore. So that's a demographic change. And in most cases, the houses are not occupied by the people who farm the land. Ours was one of the last farms where the farmer lives in the building and still farms the land. Other cases, usually even the ownership, somebody will buy the land, sell the house to somebody who wants a house to live in, and then farm the land. But that isn't the way it was in those days.